Our hero, because of his exceptional good looks, had everyone wishing they could get close to him and become his friends, but he was arrogant and selfish and looked down on everyone. That's why divine justice came to him and his life was turned upside down after he transformed into a skeleton. The world began to collapse as giant monsters emerged from the flames, destroying everything in their path. In the moment when all seemed lost, a white-haired sorcerer appeared to save humanity. Waves of fire and rivers of magma erupted at his feet, but he did not retreat. He unleashed a forbidden magic that consumed his very lifespan, summoning dark circles around him, powered by his own blood, which he used as the key to unlock black magic against the overwhelming force of the beasts. This was no ordinary magic. It was dark and forbidden, yet he embraced it to shield humanity. He did not call upon the strength of the living, but instead summoned the power of the dead. From beneath the ground, the fallen of ages past rose once again, transformed into warriors who fought in the name of the living. In the chaos, the sorcerer gave humanity a chance to endure. After a long and brutal battle, the mighty dragon fell beneath the crushing weight of the forbidden magic. But the ending was not a tale of joy. At first, the people praised him, calling him their savior and even celebrating his triumph. Yet, before his final breath, greedy rulers turned against him. They dragged him to the execution stand, determined to sever his head before the eyes of the masses. As he stood there, he gave one last painful smile, declaring that his curse would change the world. The blade fell, blood spilled, and the hero's life was extinguished. Even so, peace spread across the land. 100 years passed. In the quiet mountain village of Molan, life was peaceful. The thick forests surrounded the settlement, flowers bloomed in the fields, and streams nourished their petals. A young man named Louis lay stretched across the grass under the warm sunlight. His hair shimmered in the light as he asked Violet why she was in his home. With a gentle smile, she replied that she was only watering the flowers. Yet the water splashed across his face as well, making him flinch in annoyance, questioning why she poured it on him too. Life in the village carried on as normal. Knights and dwarves wandered the bustling streets, children played with their dogs, and people went about their day. Inside the tavern, Louis sat quietly while the innkeeper served him food. All the customers stared at him in awe of his beauty, the girls frozen in place, captivated by his charm. Embarrassed, the innkeeper asked if the meal was to his liking, and Louis nodded in approval. After a pause, revealed a troubling rumor. A plague had spread in a nearby village. The innkeeper grew uneasy, whispering that it might be the hero's curse. Louis dismissed the idea, but the man clarified that this was not a sickness of the body, it was a plague of love for Lord Louis. Louis groaned with frustration, warning the innkeeper that if he continued with such nonsense, he would leave. As he tried to finish his meal, a girl with elf-like ears approached, asking if he was alone and if he would join her and her swordswoman friend at the other table. With a shy wave, the swordswoman blushed, and the elf explained that this was the first time her friend had ever been interested in a man. But Louis shocked them with his blunt reply. He asked how much they would pay him. Startled, they didn't understand, so he explained with cold sarcasm that even enduring the elf's annoying presence would require payment. Humiliated, the elf girl apologized and hurried away, her face red with shame. Louis remained at the table, silently regretting his harshness and recalling the time. Another girl accused him of toying with her feelings when all he had done was wipe dust from his eye, merely stabbed for a misunderstanding. Louis had endured painful experiences in the past, yet he continued to shine because of his beauty. He lifted his face toward the light with a smile, thinking to himself how enjoyable it was to be handsome, and that the best thing in his life was his looks. Every time he sat in the tavern, both men and women stared at him in admiration, as though enchanted by his presence. People even wanted to know what he wore. And whenever he tried on clothes at a shop, villagers peeked through the windows. Once he bought something, others copied him, purchasing the same. One man even boasted about owning the same dagger Louis carried. One day, as he walked the streets, a young man approached with respect, asking to shake his hand, calling it his greatest dream. Behind him, a girl nervously laughed and asked for the same, but Louis refused them all. The young man clung to his leg, crying, and Louis yelled at him to let go. At that moment, the swordswoman he had seen earlier in the tavern appeared behind him, remarking that his life truly was fascinating. Standing confidently before him, she smirked, calling him strange and intriguing, even saying that refusing an invitation from the capital had only increased his popularity. Louis looked at her calmly, offering no reply. Trying to move past their earlier encounter, she extended her hand and invited him to drink with her. Turning his face away, he coldly asked, "Who are you? Are you here to shake my hand too? I don't want to greet anyone right now, maybe next time." Shock spread across her face, and her friend stood speechless, unable to believe what they had heard. The swordswoman's expression shifted to anger, her voice rising as she declared she would never forget this humiliation. Suddenly, she laughed aloud, her smile twisting with hatred, and her hand reached for her blade. Before she could act, a heavy hand landed on her shoulder. Furious, she turned to curse the one who dared touch her, only to freeze when she met the gaze of the large girl from earlier, the one who had wanted to shake Louis' hand. Her eyes burned with anger as she declared that only Louis had the right to kill her. Fear overtook the swordswoman as the imposing girl threatened her, warning her to leave Louis alone because he was her dream man, untouchable to anyone else. Intimidated by the icy gaze, the swordswoman and her companions retreated, though she vowed through clenched teeth that if Louis was not hers, then he would belong to no one. After they were gone, Louis thanked the girl who had defended him and asked her how much weight she could lift. With sarcasm, she replied that it was not a question fit for a lady. Louis answered only with a cold glance, and the moment ended there. Time passed and night fell, the moon rising as two mysterious figures crept toward Louis' home. They peered through his window, watching him sleep. One whispered that he was handsome, though they believed themselves even more so. The other agreed. Their leader, the same swordswoman, appeared tense, pressing them forward. Her companions tried to stop her, urging her to let it go, but she insisted that if she could not have Louis, she would kill him. With a chilling laugh, she demanded they finish it quickly. But everything turned in an instant. The men she had brought collapsed dead, while her other friends fainted. Before she could comprehend, a sharp knife pressed against her neck. Behind her stood Violet, eyes blazing, demanding to know if she had planned all of this. Terror froze the swordswoman as she realized she had never sensed Violet's presence. She stammered, asking who Violet was and why she was doing this. But Violet's cold grip on her hair yanked her down in agony. Furious, Violet shouted that flowers were meant to be admired, not plucked, her eyes wild with hatred. Raising her blade, she hissed that in her next life, the swordswoman should watch flowers from afar, instead of trying to claim them. Her scream echoed into the night, silenced forever, while Louis slept soundly, unaware. Morning came again, and Louis stepped outside. Violet greeted him with a serene smile and a soft good morning. He asked why she was up so early, then called after her to question why she watered the flowers again when she had already done so the day before. Louis told Violet that she almost died yesterday, and beneath the grass, a buried dead hand was the only sign of what happened at night. He asked her when she would return to the village again, and what if they ran out of money. She replied that if he was bored, he should find work as a hobby, but he told her he didn't want to, saying it was tiring. Louis then lay happily on the ground, declaring that he would live the next 10 or 20 years in peace and joy thanks to his beauty, not knowing what awaited him. Days passed until a stormy day arrived. Louis went to the tavern but was surprised to see the place filled with sick people lying on the ground, some dying, others screaming in pain. At that moment, he remembered the tavern owner's old words about the plague that had struck the nearby village. Anxiety consumed him as he wondered if the plague had truly reached here. Soon after, Louis lay on his bed, his body covered in sores, his fever burning him. Weakly, he turned to Violet and told her that everything had been wasted. Her eyes filled with tears as she sat beside him, crying. With bitterness, he said that he was still young and handsome, and he could have lived to show his beauty until old age and death. His voice cracked, and his eyes filled with sorrow. He whispered that he did not deserve to die this way, but he could no longer resist. Slowly, his eyes closed, and his consciousness faded, clinging only to his desire to live. Violet screamed his name in despair, begging him to open his eyes again. But Louis sank deeper into the darkness. He questioned himself, wondering if he had truly died. He thought about the time that had passed while he was unconscious. Suddenly, a strange window appeared before him, like a magical system, declaring that he had become entangled in dark magic and that his special trait was resistance to death. In his mind, he wondered if this was only a dream. Opening his eyes, he saw the treetops and the night sky full of stars, the full moon shining above him. Holding his head and groaning about a headache, he stood from the ground, shouting in frustration that it was a stupid dream. Stretching his arms, he declared with confidence that he simply could not die. Drawing his dagger and raising it to his face like a mirror, he expected to see his beauty, but instead, he saw a terrifying skull, and even his hand was nothing but bone. He stood in silence for a moment, then asked with a trembling voice, "Who is this?" Realizing the truth, he collapsed to his knees in despair. He had become a skeleton. The dagger fell from his bony hand as he screamed, and the system displayed before him, Skeleton, Luet. Level 1, Job, None. Title, Bastard. Health, 100. Mana, 0. Strength, 1. Endurance, 1. Agility, 1. Intelligence, 0. Elsewhere, an army of high-ranking knights marched across scorched land to seize control of a dark dungeon. Red banners flew high as the sound of steel clashed through the battlefield. After a fierce fight, they destroyed the dungeon, but what emerged from within was worse than anything they had imagined. The black dragon Aatrox, Lord of Shadows. Each breath of the beast scorched the earth, and even the knights themselves trembled in terror. The shocking scene revealed Louis standing before the dragon, laughing as he touched its head. The dragon looked at him with strange loyalty, even blushing and snorting steam like a small pup resting at his feet. The knights were stunned, unable to believe their eyes. Their leader admitted that in his entire life as a hunter, he had never seen anything like this. Not even the highest levels of magic could achieve it. He said this was something deeper and greater. The commander then mocked, saying that all of this was just because of Louis's handsomeness. The knights exchanged glances in disbelief, realizing that being handsome was something truly special. Louis himself thought that simply showing his face was enough to bring him glory and wealth, like any great mercenary. But reality was the opposite. Louis returned to himself. Lying on the ground as a skeleton after being kicked by a goblin. In front of him stood 3 goblins, looking at him with contempt, one of them even spitting on his skull. Louis stood up, nervously smiling, but when he saw that they would not leave him alone, he ran, while screaming, "Am I really a skeleton? This must be a dream, and if not, then why are goblins chasing me?" He kept running with them behind him, then suddenly stopped and told himself that he was the great Louis, and that he could not fear such weak goblins. He raised his sword with determination, claiming he would live somehow. But before he could finish his words, a goblin's club slammed into his skull, sending him flying as his bones shattered. He fell, screaming, "Wait, these are my bones," as they kicked and humiliated him. In his mind, he imagined standing proud with skeletal warriors at his back, goblins trembling before him. But reality pulled him back into pain as they kept beating him, until suddenly, a strong light pierced through the forest, striking one of the goblins down. A tall knight appeared, rushing forward to cut down the rest with his sword. When Louis regained consciousness, he opened his eyes and found 2 girls standing with the tall knight beside him while the soldiers had already finished off the goblins. One of the girls remarked that they seemed to have arrived too late. The knight, with sorrow in his voice, said that the goblins had eaten without leaving even a single piece and described the creatures as cruel. Louis lay on the ground, motionless, still in pain. A girl dressed as a nun whispered that this was the world, survival of the fittest. The group seemed on the verge of tears as they looked at Louis's skeletal body. Louis thought he could not get up from the pain. One of the girls offered to accompany him in honoring the memory of the dead. But to their shock, Louis rose awkwardly and said he had survived thanks to them. He waved his hand nervously, trying to reassure the anxious travelers, but it only made things worse. The travelers screamed in fear when the skeleton offered them a snack together as thanks. One of them shouted, and in the next instant, Louis's head flew off his shoulders from a sharp sword strike. The travelers cried out that they had never heard of a skeleton that could speak, so he must be a demon. In panic, they said they had to warn the villagers immediately and fled, leaving Louis's severed head lying on the ground. The protagonist reflected on people and monsters, wondering how he had ended up like this. His head, still lying on the ground, muttered that he needed to return home first. By the time he reached the village, it was early morning, but what he saw horrified him. There were only ruins where the village once stood. He wondered in terror what had happened, and if it was truly because of the plague. Looking around, Louis saw his house in ruins and questioned why the flowers had withered. He noticed that Violet's home was still standing, unchanged despite the time that had passed. After a pause, he slowly opened the door, peering inside in surprise that it was unlocked. He complained about the smell of alcohol and wondered if anyone was living there. He insisted that Violet would not drink at this time. Suddenly, a pair of sinister eyes appeared behind him. Violet lunged forward with her favorite knife, stabbing through his skeletal arm. Louis screamed in fear, asking if this was really Violet. She appeared drunk, flushed, and unsatisfied, and before he could make sense of it, she struck his skull with one swift blow. Louis's body flew back, crashing into the wall, screaming loudly as his detached skeletal hand still clutched Violet's blade. She stood with her head lowered for a few moments before tossing the hand away. Louis was horrified, believing that Violet might never recognize him again. He wondered in confusion why she was suddenly angry with him. Violet brought her knife to his face, her expression darkening with rage. Louis couldn't figure out what had happened while he was gone. He got up from the ground and asked Violet to stop, but she clearly had no intention of doing so and just kept moving forward toward the defenseless skeleton. In the blink of an eye, Violet vanished from her spot, startling Louis. She found herself behind him, asking who he was. Out of habit, Violet pressed her knife to the skeleton's throat as she stood behind him and asked why the monster was acting human and why it was pretending they knew each other. There was tension in the room, and Violet wouldn't let Louis out of her grip. The main character screamed as he turned to Violet, saying it was him. He shouted that he was Louis. Violet's eyes widened in shock and she froze for a second, trying to process this. The main character said he didn't know why he had turned into a skeleton either. Violet lowered her knife, and Louis said he had suddenly woken up, but this was just the calm before the storm. And the next second, Violet grabbed Louis again and threw him to the ground. The main character screamed in pain again, while Violet overwhelmed him with anger. Louis got up from the ground, trembling with pain. But as soon as he did, Violet put her hand on his skull and immediately with a shocking motion sat on top of the main character's skeleton, waving her knife while holding Louis by his skull. angrily asking how he dared to impersonate the main character. Her eyes became wild with rage and she screamed that she would grind him to dust. Louis screamed desperately, asking her to wait, trying to explain that it was him. Violet's hand remained on his skull and her knife was already moving toward his skull when Louis shouted that he was the same flower. Violet's knife stopped a few centimeters above the hero's skull, and she looked at him with shock in her eyes. Memories of the past immediately flashed through her head where Louis had asked her why she called him flower. Violet answered with a laugh that it was because flowers were fragrant. The main character got up from the ground with a displeased and wet face, because Violet had poured water on him and called him flower. Louis turned to Violet and asked why she called him flower. Louis asked if it was because of the clothes. Violet agreed with him, then said with a smile that he was beautiful like a flower. She laughed, closing her eyes. Violet returned to reality. She was sobbing and her tears flowed and dripped onto Louis's skull that lay beneath her. It turned out Louis noticed this. He turned to face her and turned to Violet with concern. He asked Violet with tears if this was true. Tears flowed from her eyes when she asked Louis again if it was really him. She said she had missed him so much. Dawn's sunlight pierced the room and Violet hugged Louis's skeletal frame that was still lying on the ground. After a while, when Violet had calmed down, she began telling Louis that a lot had changed in a year. The main character said in frustration that he had been dead for a whole year. He raised his head up then asked Violet why she was talking this way. Violet sat all this time with her back turned to the main character, then answered awkwardly that she was still trying to get used to it. This was very painful for Louis and he started crying. Violet said that a demon had suddenly appeared. Louis turned in surprise, shouting what kind of demon. Violet explained to him that a war had started because of demons, and some kingdoms had already entered it. However, Violet said she simply couldn't leave this place full of his memories, then said that he had appeared after that. They continued sitting with their backs to each other, and Louis said understandingly that this was why there were goblins near the village. Then the main character called Violet and asked if he could return to his previous appearance now that he was just a skeleton, a shadow of his former self. Violet asked him not to worry. She turned with a cheerful smile and said she knew. There was warmth in her gaze as she continued saying she knew how to restore him to his old face. Louis looked at her in surprise, waiting for what she would say next. After a while, the main character was already standing on the edge of the cliff, and Violet was standing behind him. Louis told her he would do anything to become as he was. He looked down from the cliff then continued, saying it might be dangerous and asked if she would follow him. The main character looked tragically down from the cliff as if preparing to jump. Violet pressed her hands together and agreed. She said her job was to take care of the most beautiful flowers. A smile was forming on her face as she spoke about this. Louis said that in this case, they would set out in search of his beauty. Finally, they began moving forward while smiling. Violet followed him, with the help of a regeneration potion that heals all wounds instantly, as well as red spider claws and blue lizard tail and green deer blood. The main character directed her blade upward in front of her as she addressed what was in front of her and said this was her final component. In front of her was a huge monster, the king of the lake, named Leviathan. Leviathan was massive, towering above Louis with his mouth wide open and his eyes glowing as he looked at the main character. Louis looked at him confidently from below, then commanded Leviathan to come to him. After that, he described him as an ugly creature with a fish face. Leviathan looked at him in amazement, with wide eyes and open mouth as he wondered to himself. Then he thought in amazement about this crazy man. As he contemplated carefully, Leviathan thought he could kill him with just a little finger. At that moment, the hero was waving his hands carelessly. Leviathan looked at him wondering what he was even asking for, while the hero opened his mouth smiling and asked if he was afraid. Leviathan gave him a threatening look and frowned, then let out an angry howl and opened his mouth wide and began approaching Louis, who was running from him. The hero started running away, screaming that he had caught him. Then, he raised his head up and screamed loudly. And at that moment, Violet, who was carrying a dagger in her hand, jumped from a nearby slope, heading toward Leviathan. At the same time, Louis jumped away from Leviathan. Violet advanced toward his neck with sharp knives in her hand, while Leviathan's face showed surprise. Then he turned toward her, realizing the skeleton had tricked him. So his mouth opened in amazement and he looked at her in astonishment as she approached him. After a moment, blood gushed to flood the place around them. The hero stood with Violet after defeating Leviathan among many trees with snow-white petals. Violet extended a container toward Louis, so he reached out to receive it. The container was filled with red liquid, a regeneration elixir, possessing mysterious healing power from heavenly light, capable of healing wounds. The hero raised his head in amazement and asked if this worked in this place. Violet raised her head smiling and answered him positively. adding that he had to be where cherry blossoms bloom. Then Louis pointed the container toward his hand, suggesting trying it, but Violet quickly put her hand in front of him and asked him to wait, then with a sharp movement of her dagger made a small cut in her hand, so blood flowed from it. The hero opened his mouth in amazement and asked what she was doing, but Violet, with calm features, held the container and said she would try it on herself first as a precaution. Drops of the elixir began falling on the wound in her palm, and suddenly, a girl with large wings appeared in the sky and extended her hands toward Violet. Louis was watching the scene amazed, his eyes wide and mouth open, his body tense. He screamed loudly in amazement as he looked at this. Then Violet smiled and placed the elixir bottle on Louis's extended hand, saying his turn had come. He took a confused breath, then grabbed the container and looked at it carefully. He called Violet by name, so she asked him joyfully what he wanted. He answered that without her he would be nothing, and thanked her sincerely with those words. Violet saw him as if he were handsome Louis. Violet opened her eyes and mouth wide in great amazement as she stared at him. Meanwhile, Louis pulled the cork from the container and raised it high, remembering what happened to him, saying that everything was over, that miserable life had come to an end. Tears poured from his empty skull as he repeated that if he returned he would live as a true promise. Then he screamed angrily and broke the container over his head so the elixir spilled completely on him. A thick green liquid spread on the ground under the cherry trees, and bone fragments and leather gloves that Louis had been wearing moments before appeared in it. Violet stood beside him with terrified features, screaming his name, while he made painful sounds as he raised melting bones in his hand, asking fearfully what was happening. The sky above them thickened and turned dark purple, and the wind scattered the white cherry petals away. Violet lowered her eyebrows sadly as she looked ahead. Meanwhile, the hero used the last of his strength to slam his skull against the ground, and continued hitting his head violently, despite Violet's pleas for him to calm down. He turned to her asking why he should calm down, asking why he didn't return as he was. In front of his bone fragments floating in the green liquid, he wondered if he would stay like this forever, and why the elixir didn't work. Then he raised his head toward the sky angrily, wondering why. He knelt before Violet, wondering if he would never be human again. Violet stood facing him with worry filling her face, her hands pressed to her chest. He said he no longer had a reason to live, suggesting coldly that his death might be better. Violet's lips trembled with emotion, but she smiled sadly and stepped toward him, saying, "There might be another way." Suddenly, a huge explosion thundered behind her at close range, thick dust rising from it. Violet turned in surprise toward the source, while Louis covered his face with his hands to avoid breathing the dust. Violet quickly drew her daggers, looking ahead and telling Louis to run as fast as possible. But the hero, surprised, wondered what was happening. Then a creature with red hair and a single horn appeared before them, its eyes blood red with narrow yellow pupils, and fangs like sharp knives. Its aura clearly indicated it was the Demon King. The massive Demon King with broad wings approached them quickly. Violet turned to Louis and told him to run while she tried to buy time, but the hero ignored her words and walked casually toward the Demon King, wondering how powerful it was if it was a king among demons. Violet tried to stop him with hand gestures, but he moved steadily toward the Demon Queen, asking her to do him a favor. He then opened his mouth wide and made a single request, for her to kill him. The Demon Queen looked at him intently, noticing that this loathsome creature was asking for death while already being dead. She found it extremely interesting, analyzing that he was neither fully alive nor fully dead, making him an unprecedented creature. She licked her lips with a demonic smile and told him she would do what he asked and kill him. She carefully extended her hand toward him, while the hero confirmed to himself that he had had enough, and if he couldn't return to how he was, death was better for him. He looked in terror at the Demon Queen's hand as it approached him. Suddenly, Violet appeared between him and her hand, asking for forgiveness. Louis looked at her in shock with his mouth open, asking her confusedly what she was doing. With a sharp movement, Violet pushed him away several meters, then smiled at him and told him her only wish, for him to stay alive. She reminded him that there were people in the world still willing to protect him. Then she smiled at him tenderly before turning with focus toward the Demon Queen, who was staring at her with interest. The two began approaching each other with fiery gazes. Violet stood with her dagger extended before her while the Demon Queen prepared her sharp claws for battle. With a quick movement, Violet surprised her opponent and struck her in the chest, then moved lightly around her while her eyes gleamed like swords. The Demon Queen let out a gasp of surprise, and a small wound appeared at her collarbone. She placed her hand on the wound in confusion, stared at her palm, stained with her blood, then smiled broadly and let out an evil laugh, raising her wings and arms high, declaring she would fight with her full strength. Then her eye gleamed with bright light as she activated Lucifer's eye power. She launched into the sky using Lucifer's eye and began concentrating enormous magical energy in her palm. Violet raised her head tiredly with a tense face, realizing she was fast and that she had to defend. She took a fighting stance with her dagger before her, but the Demon Queen suddenly attacked her with a lightning strike using her claws, easily cutting through Violet's sword and slashing her chest. She said with a savage look that Lucifer's eye reveals the essence of everything, so she couldn't defend herself. Then she prepared for a new attack with even greater magical energy. After a moment, a magical energy explosion echoed high above the cherry trees, and crimson blood stained the ground. A drop of blood dripped on the Demon Queen's face, and she licked it with her tongue, smiling and saying she hadn't expected this strike. Not only avoiding the blow but hitting her opponent at the same time. She addressed Violet, saying she liked her, then called to her as if she were just a weak human. Violet looked at her with one eye, as the other was injured. The Demon Queen smiled and said she should become her servant, then wondered why a strong human like her would risk her life for a half-dead skeleton. Violet caught her breath with difficulty, then smiled confidently saying she had promised to water the flowers. She added with a sarcastic smile that a bloodthirsty demoness wouldn't understand the feeling of losing someone dear. The Demon Queen looked at her in surprise and said her words reminded her of something she was trying to forget. Then suddenly her eyes widened and her mouth opened as she declared that she would die. Violet closed her eyes in resignation, preparing for her fate. But suddenly, a strong scream echoed. No. Violet opened her eyes wide in surprise to see Louis standing before her, protecting her with his body, his dagger extended. She was confused and asked him fearfully why he had returned. He answered while staring ahead sharply that he didn't know, then shouted that he had nothing left to lose. The Demon Queen looked tired, placing her hand on her forehead, and sighed deeply, then wondered about this color, before a bright golden light covered her face, forcing her to shield her sight with her hand. She observed the scene with great interest and said in surprise that she could see his truth through Lucifer's eye, wondering admiringly, is this what he really is? She saw Louis in his former form, an extremely handsome young man with golden hair, in the Demon King's castle, which was a massive floating rock with a palace at its center shrouded in deep darkness. One of the huge muscular demons got angry and screamed that this was impossible, then asked angrily, how could a demon refuse to kill? He tensed his whole body and screamed that this was madness. A small demon addressed him, saying he was just a guard and asked him to calm down, and another short demon joined to calm him. Suddenly, a goose wearing a suit with two small horns approached them. He frowned and asked what was happening. The guard looked at him confused and called him Elder, explaining that he didn't understand why the queen refused to tear apart humans, and that they had seen everything through the crystal. Then the elder furrowed his brows and said seriously, that's because the Demon Queen has given her heart to a man. The guard asked in surprise, how is this possible? The elder asked him to look around. The guard looked at a brick wall with many pictures of Louis as a young man hanging on it. The elder explained that all of this was dedicated to a man called Louis. The guard wondered if this was some kind of magic, but the elder answered irritably with a no and called him a fool, then waved his wing as he walked away, explaining that in his homeland, this was called demon behavior. After a short silence, he clarified that this behavior was known as fandom. At that moment, the Demon Queen rushed quickly toward Louis, then threw herself into his arms. Louis and Violet watched this in great surprise. Heavy tears poured from the Demon Queen's eyes as she appeared extremely happy, screaming that she had missed him so much. The hero remained stunned while she hugged his skeleton tightly. For long centuries, there had been only 10 demon kings, and the best of them was the black dragon Atrox. Among demons there was a belief that her existence meant humanity's destruction was just a matter of time. And now, Atrox with her flowing tears and open lips, screamed to Louis that she had really wished to see him. The hero asked her in confusion, what do you mean? Atrox wiped her tears with a sad face and said, so this is what happened to him. Then she looked at the ground sadly and indicated that it must have been very difficult for him. After that, she asked him how he ended up in this ugly, useless skeletal body. Violet's eyes widened in surprise, and she pressed her lips while staring at Louis. The hero looked intently at Atrox and said to himself, here is the Demon Queen. Atrox placed her hands on her stomach and asked him if this meant he was looking for a way to get his body back. Then she looked shyly at the ground and asked him not to worry, enthusiastically confirming that she would accompany him and help him recover his beautiful body. Violet screamed angrily that she couldn't be trusted, then reminded him that she was a demoness. The hero extended his hand in front of Violet to stop her from confronting, then turned to Atrox and asked if she wanted to help him recover his body. She answered positively, then raised her fist and pointed with 2 fingers from her hand, explaining that the reason was that the human world was full of dangers, and continued looking at Violet and said that this human was too weak to protect him. Violet glared at her angrily and frowned, asking what she meant, then declared confidently, while stepping on the ground, that she was the protector of flowers here, and that Louis was the one she protected. She placed her hand on her chest proudly, looking at Atrox defiantly. The hero kept watching the argument between the two girls in confusion, while Atrox clenched her jaw angrily, and veins appeared on her face from the intensity of her emotion. She screamed not to make her laugh, then turned toward Violet in confusion and tears and asked, "Then why did you let Louis die?" and demanded an answer. Violet was confused and didn't know what to say, so she cut off her words and couldn't reply. Then Atrox turned to Louis and said she realized he still had difficulty trusting her. Then she played with her hair with a seductive look and asked, what if he became her master and signed a contract with her? Louis looked at her in surprise and asked, "A contract?" Then Violet exploded in anger and said indignantly that she was addressing her master. After a short while, when the clear sky's light filled the forest clearing, a rabbit appeared carrying a large carrot in its mouth, hopping cheerfully. Suddenly, a massive thunderous explosion occurred that lit up the horizon with magical energy, rising kilometers into the sky, spreading a shock wave that destroyed everything in its vicinity. Amid the destruction appeared a document written on an ancient scroll, and it was a contract with a demon, stating that life was the wager. According to this contract, Atrox agreed to follow Louis until he regained his former shape, and the penalty for violating it was destruction of the soul. Then Atrox smiled broadly, clasped her fists to her chest with joy, and said enthusiastically that the contract had been made, and she would do everything necessary to help him. At that moment, the hero was looking at her coldly, holding the document in his hands. Violet stood behind him trembling from the intense anger she felt, while the hero answered affirmatively, then asked her name. Atrox smiled widely as she approached him, and told him her name was the Black Dragon Atrox. The hero put his hand on his skull and repeated, "Black Dragon," then noticed the name was long and difficult to call, so he suggested giving her a new name. Atrox looked at him in surprise, placing her hand on her hip, and asked him again, "A new name?" Louis thought briefly, placing his hand on his chin, then spoke audibly about her being a demoness, but also a good dragon helping him. He told her he would call her Draconi. Atrox raised her eyebrow in surprise and repeated the name. Draconi. She knew well that dragon names passed from generation to generation. She looked down at her feet with displeasure, bit her lips with her teeth, and her body trembled from the intensity of her emotions. After that, she raised her face, her cheeks reddened, and she screamed bashfully, "What a lovely name." She jumped with joy and turned to Louis, telling him he was the best. The hero looked at her smiling and asked what they would do now. Violet watched the scene silently without speaking. After a while, they reached a new area that was a desert, where a small lizard was holding its tail in its hands fleeing from a scorpion. Violet pointed with her finger and asked Louis to look, then told him they were approaching the village. Atrox and the hero were walking behind her, all wearing long cloaks with hoods suitable for the desert environment. Louis screamed with a miserable face, complaining about the intense heat, sweat pouring heavily from his skull, and said tiredly he was dying. Violet approached him from behind with concern and asked what was wrong with him. He answered that she should see for herself, then told her he didn't feel well. Violet looked at Atrox, who was walking ahead of them, then asked Louis if it was good that she accompanied them. Louis looked at Atrox's back while Violet said that demons were creatures that hunted humans for entertainment, and no one knew what was going through her mind. At that moment, Atrox was walking exhausted with her face covered in sweat, and wondered to herself, "What hell is this?" Violet turned to Louis and told him she was just worried about them traveling with a demoness. Louis raised his hand toward her face and suddenly flicked her forehead with his finger, leaving a small scratch that made her close her eyes in pain. He called her name and told her to listen. He told her he didn't care if she was human or demon. What mattered was that she would help him recover his body. He added that since becoming a skeleton, he had been living every day in hell. Then he explained he knew she was worried about him, but asked her not to worry. At that moment, the small lizard had escaped from the scorpion after taking refuge with a larger lizard that defended it, so the scorpion stopped its pursuit. The hero looked intently at Violet and asked if she was here to help him, and before she could answer, he told her that if so, there was no need to worry about trivial matters. After that, he enthusiastically invited her to continue walking. Violet looked ahead with wide eyes, confusion overwhelming her, and asked herself how she could be so rude, remembering that he had always helped her. But she thought, what if she couldn't trust Louis? While thinking about this, the hero kicked a small animal on the sand with a sly smile and asked them how they dared block his path. Violet smiled while staring at her closed fist and asked herself, who would believe in him? Then she remembered Atrox's anger when she asked why he was dead. Then she swore to herself that she wouldn't let him die again, and confirmed confidently that she would protect him like she protects flowers. At that time, Louis was putting the hood on his skull and thinking carelessly that he wished he could find his beautiful face quickly. After a short time, they reached a large rock with a cave inside it, with 2 guards with spears at its entrance. This cave was known as Arenos, and inside it was a small city. The city was lit thanks to cracks in the rocks that allowed sunlight or moonlight to enter. The city consisted of sandy houses of different sizes, and people wandered through its streets. Atrox stood covering her head with her hood next to an old man begging for money, while Violet passed near two men with criminal features, who looked at her with threatening glances. As for Louis, he was walking lightly in the street waving his arms. Violet turned to him warning and said the place was dangerous, and asked him to stay close to her. Atrox mocked her words with a smile, saying she knew the place was dangerous and yet brought Louis here. Then Atrox stuck to Louis and told him to stay with her and she would protect him. The hero moved away from her, asking her not to get close to him, justifying this by saying it was already hot here. Then Violet said with annoyance that they hadn't come to this place in vain but searching for Louis's body, then screamed at her to think about her words. The hero went forward and told Violet he knew he could depend on her, then asked if she had a plan. Violet smiled and thanked him for trusting her. At that moment, Atrox extended her hands longingly toward Louis, who left her behind. So Violet turned to her with wild eyes and a mocking smile. Atrox's face immediately distorted, her veins swelled. Her eyes turned a bright bloody red, and she glared at her angrily, screaming, asking if she was trying to provoke her. Atrox rushed forward angrily, asking her to come to her, while Violet didn't respond to her provocation and just stuck out her tongue mockingly. The hero didn't notice anything happening behind him, but continued walking forward, humming a simple tune. After a short time, they reached a building with a sign in front, indicating it was a tavern. They entered inside, and Louis yawned tiredly, placing his hand on his chest. Then noticed it was getting late and suggested they rest. He explained he had rented 2 rooms. Violet and Atrox looked at him in confusion while he headed to one of the rooms, so Atrox immediately ran after him. The hero raised his hands, bidding the others farewell until tomorrow, and entered the room, while Violet followed Atrox with angry looks as she chased Louis. The hero turned to Atrox in surprise and asked what she wanted. She raised her head toward him with teary eyes and said he had rented 2 rooms, then asked him to let her stay with him. Violet approached angrily and asked her violently about her intentions, then screamed, asking why she was pressuring him. She announced in front of Louis that she would sleep with him. Then Atrox grabbed Violet's hair tightly and pulled it back, ordering her to stop, then screamed that she was the one who would sleep with him. Violet looked at her with anger in her eyes and asked how she could allow a demoness to stay with him. Meanwhile, the hero quietly entered the room and closed the door behind him, leaving the 2 girls sighing sadly. After a while, the 2 sat in another room facing each other. Atrox began cursing at Violet and asking her to leave, so Violet replied, asking her not to curse. Then she said cursing was bad, so Atrox replied while crossing her arms over her chest that it was okay because she was a demon. She added nervously that if it weren't for Violet's presence, she would have already slept in the same room with him. Violet's eyes widened in surprise, and she said she wouldn't allow that to happen as long as she was here. Atrox stood up with a wild smile and asked why she needed her permission, so Violet stood up in turn, holding her blade threateningly, confirming she wouldn't allow this no matter what happened. After a few moments, the candle in the room went out, and a violent battle erupted between Atrox and Violet. Each attacked the other fiercely. Violet jumped trying to stab Atrox with her dagger, but the latter blocked with her claws. Then Violet rushed with a double attack using her feet, and the 2 exchanged a torrent of blows in different forms. After a few moments, Violet tried to kick her, while Atrox tried to hit her with her fist, so Violet's foot collided with Atrox's fist with tremendous force. Violet and Atrox exchanged glances, and there was a scratch on Violet's face with blood flowing from it, while Atrox's body was filled with several other scratches. Atrox smiled a wild smile while staring directly at her rival. After a few moments, the wall in the room began to collapse from the intensity of the violent fighting. Unable to withstand this stormy clash, stone fragments fell to the ground. Then Atrox and Violet stood facing each other, taking fighting positions, each ready to deliver the next blow. But suddenly, their concentration was interrupted by loud screaming from the side. They turned to see a man wearing a pig costume for roleplay, with a metal chain hanging around his neck from which a clear padlock dangled. He pointed his finger at them angrily and asked them sharply what they were doing here. On the bed next to him was a girl wearing a cat costume for roleplay, who burst into loud laughter at the ridiculous situation that had occurred. Atrox smiled cheerfully and called out to them reassuringly that they wouldn't disturb them, but asked them to continue what they were doing. Violet covered her face with her palm from embarrassment and asked for their pardon, then added that they should respect their preferences. But while she was looking through her fingers, she glimpsed in the room. She was peering into the presence of a bone and cloak on the bed, so she screamed that this was Louis's room. Immediately, she and Atrox rushed into the torn room. Atrox began searching the place with her eyes while screaming his name, Louis. Violet entered quickly, with her dagger raised ready to attack, and asked her worriedly what had happened to him. But Atrox, examining the place, noticed he wasn't there, so she wondered if he had gone out for a short walk. Violet answered with a firm no, which made Atrox stare at her in amazement. Then she looked back at the bed with fear, and called out to Violet, saying that this was Louis's bone and his cloak, the one that belonged to him until recently. Violet answered firmly that he wouldn't have gone anywhere without his cloak. Atrox opened her arms nervously, while Violet said with a gloomy face that Louis had been kidnapped. They looked into each other's eyes with concentration. At the same time, under the night sky, a cart pulled by a single horse was moving through strange natural terrain, and inside it, Louis was deep in sleep, lying peacefully. As for Violet and Atrox, they were quickly approaching a massive skeletal structure of an ancient beast. While they were running, Atrox turned to Violet and asked her, in a voice carrying a mixture of concern and seriousness, if she had any idea where Louis was now. Violet replied while continuing to run without stopping, then pointed her hand forward saying, "There." So Violet explained to her that this was the central auction house. The place appeared as a lit space inside a towering sandy cliff that rose above the treetops. They hurried toward it, so Atrox asked her if this place was for trading goods. Violet answered that everything was sold there without exception, and added that no one tried to find out where or how these goods were obtained, whether by theft or blackmail. The important thing was money. Then Atrox asked if Louis had ended up at the auction. Violet answered seriously while staring ahead that Louis might seem useless, but the world was full of crazy eccentrics whose desires couldn't be imagined. Then she added that she herself, despite being human, was now following a demon. So what was strange about that? But her words weren't completed, as a huge arrow with a sharp metal head shot toward her head at tremendous speed. Atrox looked with great amazement at the arrow flying directly toward Violet, and saw blood splattering from her side. She turned to her and saw that Violet had stopped the arrow with her bleeding hand, holding it with her palm extended to the side, blood flowing over her fingers while she looked with determination. Violet asked sharply who they were, so two young men stood watching them from the side. One of them laughed broadly on his face, then looked at her and said it was a surprise attack, with precision forward, and said he couldn't believe she had actually managed to block the arrow from that distance. After that, they looked forward together and said at the same time that they were impressed by her. They were twins known as X and TR. X asked his brother TR if he was impressed by her too, so TR smiled broadly with enthusiasm while staring at his brother, then asked him if he was now talking about the girl with purple hair. After that, he repeated his question about whether he had thought about her too. Violet stared at them with wide eyes, while a look full of bitterness appeared on Atrox's face. X raised his hand up and said their mother advised them not to fight over women. TR put his hand on his head with an annoyed face and said maybe the solution was to simply kill her. X supported his brother's idea with joy, and drew two long swords from behind his back while screaming, "Exactly," then looked at Violet with bloody looks saying they would simply kill her. As for TR, he raised his hand which had a small bow attached and smiled broadly and shouted that they were carrying out their mother's orders. With enthusiastic looks and tense faces, they introduced themselves confidently, and asked Violet to remember their names. But they couldn't finish their words, as Violet moved with lightning speed, and tore their bodies together with her blades, inflicting a huge number of deep wounds on them at once, making them drop their weapons in shock, while blood flowed heavily from their fresh wounds. Then Violet said with an emotionless face that they should come forward. Atrox approached one of the twins' bodies and placed her foot on it and asked her what she was doing, then said it would have been better to interrogate them. Violet frowned and said they were talking too much about unimportant matters. Atrox remained standing next to the defeated brothers' bodies with a surprised look, then turned to Violet and said she agreed with her. After a short time, they reached a cave entrance that was camouflaged with palm leaves. Near the entrance were two guards, one carrying a long spear, glaive. This entrance led to the Arcanus, which was the auction house. Inside the auction hall, the host was holding a microphone with a broad smile on his face. With his other hand he tore a piece of cloth that was covering one of the exhibits, and said this item belonged to the famous dragon hunter. Then he tore the cloth completely to reveal that the exhibit was old underwear belonging to the hero Dravik, and it looked worn and torn, with a picture of a muscular rabbit on it. The host continued his words, saying that this hero was wearing these exact underwear during his adventures. The audience in the hall began bidding on them. A man wearing glasses raised a wooden board bearing the number 2 announcing his bid. Then another man directly in front of him raised a wooden board bearing the number 10 with a confident look. After a while, a girl raised her hand with a wooden board bearing the number 20, while pressing her face shyly. The host continued his talk with a broad smile saying, "These underwear went through many hardships," then extended his hand forward and announced they were sold for 25 gold pieces, then shouted with joy congratulating the winning bidder. After selling the hero's underwear, the service staff brought new items to the platform. The host pointed his hand to those items, then said in a loud voice that the time had now come for something everyone had been waiting for a long time. The show host had a broad smile on his face as he looked ahead, saying that the last segment for today was. Then he removed the cloth from the thing, and with a triumphant expression on his face, said that this segment was a picture of the most handsome young man named Louis. The painting, which was displayed for all spectators to see, depicted Louis naked from the upper half, covering his face with his hand. The show host said this man had an incredible appearance, looking like a gift from God. He told the audience that even monsters fell in love with him, despite the fact that he was a real scoundrel. Emotions overwhelmed the spectators who saw this picture. The show host approached another thing that cloth was hiding. He said that, however, it was too early to be amazed, and that the buyer of this painting would also get Louis's skeletal structure. After these words, with a sharp movement of his hand, he threw the cloth and revealed to the audience a skeleton crucified on a velvet stand. The show host looked toward the audience with his mouth and eyes wide open, then looked at the skeleton with a confused look and asked them if they wanted to make sure the skeleton really belonged to Louis. The show host thought, with a tense expression on his face, that this wasn't possible, calling them fools, realizing it was just a random skeleton he had just brought from his tavern. Then he asked himself thoughtfully how they would verify if this was true. With a sly look on his face, he turned his gaze to the side, realizing he would sell both the picture and the skeleton, thus doing two things at once. The show host stood near the skeleton and said it was Louis's skeleton, and he guaranteed that, and after that said this would help liven up the atmosphere in their home. After that, he laughed loudly, suggesting he might be dead, but he assured the audience that, however, he was now here before them. The show host shouted at them that such an exhibit couldn't be bought anywhere else. After that, he announced that the sale of the special product would start at a price of 100 gold. A voice was heard from inside the auction house saying he would give 300. At this time, Violet was approaching the door leading into the auction house. At her feet were the defeated guards who had recently been guarding the entrance. Inside, auction participants raised their wooden signs with different numbers, shouting that they would give 800. The host looked ahead with his eyes wide open and said into the microphone that it was 900. Then he asked in confusion whether anyone was ready to bid 1,000. When he asked this, drops of sweat flowed down his face. The man who was completely hidden under the cloak and hood he was wearing raised his sign, indicating his bid. The host was filled with the emotions he was experiencing, and opened his mouth and eyes wide and shouted that this was the highest price in history. Then he announced loudly that if there were no more willing people, the goods would go too. He didn't have time to finish his words because the door in the hall they were in suddenly exploded, cutting off his speech. He looked ahead in confusion. The auction house where the event was being held filled with loud screaming. The host, looking ahead in surprise, stretched his hand forward and asked what was happening. At the entrance where the door had been blown up a few moments earlier, Atrox and Violet stood. Atrox opened her mouth wide and addressed the people inside as vile creatures and asked them where Louis was. Violet asked her not to swear. Atrox angrily turned to Violet and shouted, reminding her that she was an evil demon. Violet looked at her with a surprised expression and said nothing in response to that. Then Atrox angrily turned to the people inside and asked them if they had heard her. At this time, Violet looked at the stage, then called Atrox, drawing her attention. Then, Atrox also looked toward the stage. Violet, looking at the skeleton that was crucified on the stand, Atrox shouted loudly, "Louis." After that, she ran toward him at incredibly high speed, but someone wearing full armor and holding a large sword in his hand stood in her way. Atrox made a slight movement with her hand, slicing his sword, and ran. Shortly after, a large man with huge muscles carrying a massive flaming weapon in his hands jumped on her, preparing to strike her. Atrox turned her attention to him, but after a few moments, Violet's blade approached this weapon. Using her blade, she managed to strike the weapon, and thus began splitting it. The warrior who was holding this weapon in his hands looked at Violet in confusion. After a few moments, the flaming weapon exploded and sent a wave of fire toward Violet, who was close to the center of the explosion. The auction participants screamed loudly with terrified expressions on their faces as they fled from the explosion. Then one of the men asked if he had gotten rid of her. A young man with a frightened expression on his face asked him not to talk that way. Violet was on fire and her clothes were dirty and there were many fiery sparks around her. Atrox said with a confident expression on her face while smiling that they were very strong. However, they were not stronger than her. After a few moments, Atrox looked at Violet with a surprised expression and addressed her in confusion as a person. Looking at her in surprise, she said that her wounds. Violet, looking emotionlessly ahead with a damaged face and a burned hand holding a broken blade, asked Atrox to focus on saving Louis. Violet looked confidently ahead and asked her not to let her guard down. Then she mentioned that in this place there were many nobles who came to buy goods, meaning there were powerful guards who came to protect them. When she said this, they saw that wizards and a monk and a knight and a retired imperial knight were standing before them in front of a crowd of terrified aristocrats, all of different powerful ranks. Violet turned to Atrox and called her Demon Queen. She pressed her hand to her eye and said that if she was worried about Louis, she had asked her to help protect him. And after that, she said, "Please." Atrox looked at her with her eyes wide open and her eyebrows raised high. Then she asked why. Violet looked at her with a surprised expression. Atrox raised her hair with her hand with a wide smile on her face and asked her to help her. When she said this, she called her by name, Violet, for the first time. Atrox walked with her eyes glowing as she clenched her hands forward, saying she would protect Louis. Then she noted that there was no choice left. They rushed simultaneously to attack, shouting that if they had the same goal, they would simply help each other. They angrily attacked those who were in their way. Using her magical energy and tremendous strength, Atrox threw the large man several meters away. Violet sliced her blade up and down on the fighters who were blocking her. Then she opened her eyes wide and looked up. I saw that there was a large magic circle above her formed by one of the wizards. This wizard summoned a powerful lightning bolt that emerged from this magic circle and struck Violet. Then he looked ahead in confusion and said that this couldn't be. How was it that in the place where he struck with lightning, there was nothing left? The host asked them in amazement why they weren't hurt, while Atrox and Violet looked at him with calm features, and told him they only felt some tickling from his attacks. Then the host asked them if this was what they really wanted, and when he said that, he described them as thieves. He was dragging beside him a huge wooden hammer, confidently repeating that this was definitely what they were seeking. He approached the skeleton and announced that Louis was the main item in today's auction. Then he looked with a gloomy face at the skeleton, and said that if this product started threatening his dear customers, all he could do then was dispose of the product. He gripped the hammer handle tightly with both hands. Then with a sharp blow, the hammer came down on the skeleton crucified on the platform, and its bones flew in all directions and shattered into small fragments. The host appeared with an angry face, his eyes wide, and inside, he was talking to himself wondering, what do they think of my amazing performance? He thought that if he just ran away, his customers would never come back to him. Outside, the carriage was standing beside the auction hall, so a man approached it and asked why it hadn't moved yet. At that moment, the host was thinking that he had to make sure his customers would attract more buyers to him. The auction participants followed what happened with amazed faces. A girl put her hand to her mouth in fear, and the man sitting next to her clutched his chest with wide eyes staring ahead. The host tightened his features, realizing he now had a real image of Louis, as well as a fake skeleton. Then Atrox muttered through her teeth the name, Louis, with a dark expression on her face. As soon as she said that, the clouds in the sky began to swirl violently, forming a vortex around a giant glowing red ball that was high in the sky. The auction participants looked around in amazement, while the whole place began to shake violently. One of the men looked at his feet in astonishment and asked, "Is this an earthquake?" While another man raised his head up and shouted, "The sky looks strange." At that moment, Atrox was releasing a huge amount of dense magical energy, spreading her wings wide and raised threateningly. She shouted that she had promised to restore Louis to his original form, but she acknowledged at the same time that she had been too arrogant. Then she stepped forward with tears streaming down her cheeks, one of her eyes red and glowing and the other white and bright, speaking words devoid of any emotion except pain, declaring, "Today, everything will end. You will all die today." Red bloody energy rose to the sky. Outside the auction, there was a puddle of Type 2 on the ground because Jerix, the guard of the Imperial Felton family, known by the title, the Storm, was unlucky enough to be stationed there and of course couldn't maintain his courage. Initially, Jerix thought he would be the hero, because despite his poverty, he possessed crushing power that qualified him to join the elite course at the magic school and rebuild his family. But now, before him, there was a power more crushing than his. As for Atrox, being the Demon Queen, she didn't care about his life at all. Fortunately, at the last moment, Violet stopped the girl, warning her that the building would collapse at this rate. In turn, Atrox asked whether Violet was calm about the hero's death. But Violet told her that the hero hadn't actually died, and asked her to take a close look at Louis' bones. It seemed that after becoming a skeleton, the hero had gained the ability of super regeneration, an ability that far surpassed healing magic. Thus, Atrox stopped attacking, because this meant that Louis was still alive. But while the auction host tried to sneak away, Violet reminded him that as long as they wouldn't demolish the building, they could at least punish those responsible. The girl wasted no time in eliminating not only the auction organizer, but all his guards as well. Because of this, that wizard who appeared earlier tried to attack with an electric spell. But Violet was very angry at her failure to live up to the hero's trust. Memories of her failures kept coming back to her mind. So, Violet decided to vent her anger in her own way until the hero regenerated, just like any real killer would do. Faced with this scene, Atrox was a bit surprised, as it was clear that her companion was human, but she was radiating an aura more evil than a demon's during battle. For this reason, the queen realized that Violet hadn't shown everything she had in their previous fight. In fact, Atrox found this state of rage frightening and admitted she couldn't outdo it. However, the fact that she feared a human while she herself was the demon queen angered her. In the end, while she was about to be attacked from behind, she remembered that she was a black dragon and was considered the strongest demon king. So, she simply released a bit of her aura, which sent all the cowards flying away while saying she couldn't lose. Although the girl's second horn hadn't regenerated yet, she thought she had no choice, and asked Violet in her mind to watch her, because she was the one who would save the hero first by destroying all those bastards, then screamed at them demanding they return Louis to her. For her part, Violet began taking real interest in her companion, because in the previous battle and now, it was clear that the queen hadn't dodged any attack except for the killing blows. In this case, Violet felt confused, wondering if the demon didn't fear death. She had sworn she would risk her life for the hero, but she wasn't sure if she had the same resolve as Atrox. Anyway, the host named Dabara, who had been shamefully dismissed from his service as a knight in the Empire due to corruption, picked up a knife from the ground and advanced from behind saying that the girl would pay for ruining his auction with her death. Thus, a stab actually occurred, and the short man was very proud of his performance. But all of that was in vain because he was the one who fell to the ground. Violet thanked Atrox in her mind, giving her credit for the strength she possessed to protect Louis. Suddenly, the girl's attention was stolen by an aura that began going out of control beside her. This aura was coming from Atrox, who started screaming out of control. Violet worried that the queen couldn't control her powers, and this way, the area would be destroyed, which is exactly what happened. Anyway, after a while, the hero woke up very frightened, and the two girls were excited to see him, and asked if he was awake now. Louis seemed confused, and after looking around, he asked if everything was just a dream because he felt like he was in another place. Then, very cleverly, the two pretended not to understand while offering him a glass of water. When the water fell to the ground because Louis was a skeleton, he responded asking why their faces looked like that, and inevitably asked if they had fought again. Despite their attempts at denial, the hero couldn't think of anyone else who could smash the wall. Because of that, Atrox admitted she was the one who did it. But she explained it in her own way, saying she couldn't control her strength, and that Violet tried to calm her down. When asked about it by Louis, Violet agreed while being a bit amazed. Later, while they were walking in the hallway, Atrox commented that she felt sleepy, but Violet asked her why she lied. Without waiting, Violet clarified that she wouldn't look at her companion any better because of something like this. You're still a dangerous person. But Atrox didn't care about being scary, and simply threw something into Violet's hand, which turned out to be an ointment. That's because the demon claimed she didn't like living in debt. Then, Violet finally began to think that Atrox might really be worried about her. Later, in the same facility, our hero was warming himself with a cup of tea, stirring it with his finger while looking at himself in the mirror. Right after finishing, he put the cup on the saucer to find his old leg on the table, making him realize that the two girls had lied about the dream. At that moment, looking at the girls' faces when he woke up, it was clear that both of them had protected him. Then, he looked at himself and began thinking alone in the room that the two girls had been severely injured because of him. Then looked at his hands in silence. After that, Louis said if he could regain his appearance, he would do it no matter what it cost, and things would be different. In the end, even though he hadn't forced anyone, the two girls had volunteered to help. But so he wouldn't feel guilty, Louis reaffirmed his commitment to regaining his beauty, and now realized how selfish he had been. At this moment, screaming was heard calling for the hero. He went to the window and saw Violet saying something terrible had happened. Sighing from exhaustion, the girl explained that Atrox had suffered from a severe fever all night and lost control of her power in the end. She had transformed into a black dragon, leaving Louis in disbelief. Obviously, the hero ran to help and asked Violet to take him to her, but he stumbled while jumping from the window and fell apart. Anyway, since he had become a skeleton now, it was possible for him to run while carrying his head. When he reassembled himself, he thought that transforming into a dragon was actually pretty amazing. Back to the frantic running. At some point, Violet warned that they were about to arrive. The closer they got, the more excited Louis became to see the magnificent form of the Demon Queen. The boy even thought about flying in the area using Atrox as a mount and that the matter of regaining his form would be very easy. Then the hero hoped she would be waiting for him and introduced himself with a very enthusiastic smile. Then found two crying children. Suddenly, Louis found that Atrox's true form was a small mischievous dragon, and she had only caused trouble for a small sand castle on the ground. So, Louis remained paralyzed in front of Atrox. All his hopes were shattered. In the Demon King's castle, the little monsters couldn't believe what they saw, because standing before them was the former demon queen known as the Black Dragon. With an enthusiastic expression, she announced that she had come to reclaim her throne. Then, with powerful magic forming in the air, all the subjects tried to flee. But it was too late because Atrox cast her spell faster than the demons could escape. At least that's what she thought was happening. Louis was standing behind her preparing to hit her, and with one flick to the back of her head, the girl fainted and the hero carried her back as fast as possible. Faced with this, two bald men were very confused to see a skeleton. Since Violet wasn't the type to leave witnesses, she took on the task of making the humans lose consciousness, then went after them. After all this running, the three later managed to reach a safer alley. The hero asked if the Demon Queen was awake, and she answered yes. With great concern, she asked if she had done anything wrong while unconscious, but the hero answered no. Then, unexpectedly, she became happy at being insulted for no reason. In fact, she began to think the hero was the best. Anyway, Louis asked Atrox to get up and immediately asked her what had happened to her body. Apparently, the queen had pushed herself too hard before her body had fully recovered. But this is something she thinks she can't tell the hero because she doesn't want to worry him. Rudely, the girl simply said she didn't know and that she woke up like this. As for being different from the dragon he expected, Atrox also claimed that this was actually a good thing because even if it wasn't exactly what the hero imagined, she was sure she would protect him. In turn, Louis grabbed her waist and lifted her easily while asking if it was really possible to do that in this form. The hero really appreciated her efforts to restore his body, but he thought Atrox needed to take better care of herself before worrying about him, which made her feel embarrassed. He didn't stop there. Louis explained that the same applied to Violet. For some reason, the hero rubbed himself against Atrox's cute form, praising her softness. Naturally, the girl felt so good that she fainted from shock in the hero's arms. Since she became very hot from embarrassment, the hero let her go before getting burned. But even while lying on the ground powerless, Atrox gathered her last breath to crawl toward Violet and smile mockingly before fainting completely, leaving Violet angry. After a while, and after leaving the city, the team passes through a wide field. Louis feels the fresh air breeze, but asks why they're leaving now when the plan was to leave at night, wondering why they're in such a hurry, putting the two girls in a bind. In the end, they couldn't reveal that they were being pursued by the village criminals, so they agree that they're simply excited to restore the hero's body. Atrox states that she found what she needed in that city already, so, despite his doubts, the hero runs happily, saying he's now one step away from regaining his appearance. As soon as Louis walks away, Atrox calls out to Violet and thanks her for last night. Violet was puzzled by this. Atrox continued that it was impossible she didn't know what happened. The previous night, when Atrox was losing control and about to go into a rage, it was Violet who stopped her. Besides that, she was the one who took care of her all night, so she couldn't think she didn't know. Violet, for her part, asked the girl not to worry about it, because she didn't want to cause unnecessary concern for the hero. In the end, she declared that the queen could do whatever she wanted with her as long as it didn't cause problems for Louis. And this was the warning. The girl decided to leave for the demoness. Without wasting time, the hero tells Violet he smells delicious food nearby. While they talk about going to eat, Atrox notices that Violet treats her coldly, while being friendly with the hero, which irritates her again. A short while later, in a restaurant along the field road, the three sit at a table. Atrox feels disappointed that she had to make a lost love doll, which is a childish stress relief item to squeeze when under pressure. Meanwhile, Violet uses a sturdy hair bracelet that stretches to any size, then asked the hero how he felt. He in turn received the only auction necklace and shame clothes, which also had good effects, but he didn't like them. He threw everything aside, saying they were boring things. Luckily, Violet managed to catch them and told him he couldn't do that. The girl explained that the journey they were about to begin might be harder than they thought. From weather to monsters and demons and even other humans, everything could get in their way. For this reason, Violet said the necklace the hero got would definitely help him. Anyway, the hero asked where the Demon Queen got all these things. Atrox explained that she was wandering around when she suddenly saw something shiny and then stole it, making Louis think this might not be acceptable behavior. But regardless, Atrox declared that she didn't care about stealing from evil demons. Since this action was meant to restore his beauty, the hero agreed to it while Violet watched everything, slightly shocked. Shortly after, the three finished eating. Louis seemed to enjoy it very much, but as they were leaving, an employee called out to the group and said they hadn't paid the bill yet. Out of habit or something like that, the hero was surprised. Then Louis got very angry and said why should he pay when he did them a favor by eating there. For a moment, Violet forgot that the hero never paid for his food in the past. But to solve the problem, the owner of the place appeared, and when he heard from the employee that the customer didn't pay, even after eating all this food, he got angry and concluded that these bastards had no money at all. Anyway, the night owner called Sun to the skeleton, who is our hero, and said he didn't really know what he was, but in case he had no money, unexpectedly offered Lewis to pay with his body, which Lewis cheerfully accepted after thinking a little, since this was already his specialty. The moment people heard that, they felt worried, thinking the hero had gone crazy. As for Sun, he admits that the skeleton has confidence and expects he won't leave the place today. But as soon as he finishes speaking, Sun gets thrown into the air in an instant, breaking the ceiling. Obviously, the one responsible for this is none other than Violet. The employee quickly screams, asking if her boss is okay, but even when trying to wake him up, he seems completely confused. Going back to the moment he grabbed the skeleton's shoulder, the purple-haired woman rushed forward with a punch. But the fact that the purple-haired woman was the one who did it confuses Sun, especially since Sun knows her name for some reason, which makes Violet wonder. Regardless of anything, Sun finally manages to remember everything. A few years ago, since his family had been a lineage of knights for generations, Sun dreamed of becoming the strongest man in the world. One day, while walking in a small rural village, he bumped into Violet. Annoyed by this, he called out to her, then grabbed her head, saying that when someone bumps into another, they should apologize. Whether it was her fault or not, the man wasn't very friendly with the girl, so she simply taught him a lesson until he begged for mercy. Sun couldn't accept the fact that he lost to a woman, but the hardest thing to believe was that when Lewis appeared, Violet immediately turned and apologized. That man who controlled that strong woman with just one word became the person the knight wanted to emulate. That day, while dreaming of being strong, Sun tasted defeat for the first time. But the strong are drawn to the strong, so Sun inevitably fell in love with Mr. Lewis and prepared to confess his feeling. That day, he greeted him and said it was his pleasure to meet him. Then, with a bouquet of flowers, he introduced himself as a holy knight and began saying everything that interested him. Since Violet was angry about the confession, Lewis didn't need to do anything because she quickly scared Sun away. And so, that day, his attempt to convey his feelings ended in failure. And so, time passed until the current moment when he became a head chef. Sun couldn't believe he was seeing Violet again. But at that moment, the knight also found it hard to believe the possibility that the person next to her was Mr. Lewis. Sun wondered why he was wearing a robe. But looking at someone as handsome as Lewis, it might make sense. Seeing the strongest man again made the knight's heart beat wildly. But at this moment, he was in a weak state and didn't want to show this side to the hero. Actually, the hero wouldn't remember him anyway. But nevertheless, Sun decided to leave things as they were and told the group to leave. After all, he needed to prepare for the busy lunch hour. Unexpectedly, before returning to the kitchen, a voice said he was happy to see him well, which surprised Sun. This voice belonged to our hero, who said he was worried about Sun's sudden disappearance, and it turned out he was living here. Lewis also revealed that he read the letter left in the bouquet and praised not only the handwriting, but also the knight's cooking skills. In the end, he apologized for what happened today, but offered to pay for the meal once Sun settled his business. At this, the employee screamed, wondering if the boss would really let these lunatics go, and screamed louder when she noticed Sun wasn't paying attention. But suddenly, tears began falling from the knight's eyes, and this escalated to uncontrollable crying because the strongest man still remembered him. The other customers were amazed that the knight used the term strongest to describe another man. But since the hero came disguised with a beautiful woman, they assumed he must be someone important, except for another person in a robe with his hood up who remained silent throughout this time. After a while, the group arrived at Frager City, specifically at the adventurer's test site, where many had already gathered. At this moment, a voice yelled at a warrior not to block the way. But even while trying to find this person, he saw no one because the one speaking was Atrox in her miniature form. However, she still managed to open the way for the hero to pass with a kick. Violet asked Lewis why we were here, so Lewis told her he wanted to take the adventurer's test, then told her he needed to earn money. But instead of participating in the test, the two girls claimed they could get it for him. So, the hero asked exactly how they would earn it, but the solution the two offered was to beat up humans while ensuring it was okay because Atrox was an evil demon. Obviously, the hero worried about this illegal suggestion. Anyway, though he was happy they were thinking of doing this for him, Lewis remembered they were so broke they couldn't even pay for a meal. When he said he couldn't stand by and let this happen, both girls were moved. Again, the hero said he was here to take the test and received instructions. However, both Atrox and Violet managed to see the hero's handsome face for a moment. Because of that, with more enthusiasm than ever, they decided to register with Lewis. The next day, under heat so intense that even birds were fainting, the physical test for the first adventurer's exam was conducted. In the stands, a woman cheered for someone who might be from her family. However, Atrox played a more enthusiastic role, screaming for Lewis to crush everyone, even though it was just a physical test. From afar, in that desert-like place, the hero's silhouette appeared. Despite the difficult path, he continued running without losing hope. But his life would soon be taken from him. When a specialist analyzed the adventurer's exam results at his desk, third place went to some man and second to some unimportant woman. But as expected, first place went to Violet and last place to our hero, making some people start mocking him. But to respond to them, he just made a serious expression and claimed with complete audacity that he was going easy on them. An hour earlier, the examiner for the final test appeared and introduced herself to everyone as Elman, a genie ninja. Since Elman was known as the worst possible examiner due to her strictness, everyone was desperate. But anyway, they didn't even have time to worry, because the genie immediately took down all the complainers by throwing some blades, as talking was completely forbidden during the exam. Meanwhile, Violet found it very strange that something so thin managed to pierce the ground. Back to the test, the genie announced it would be a simple task, where participants would try to survive her attacks until time ran out. While Violet and Lewis waited for the event to begin, Atrox cheered for her friends. Then, a period of silence began when our hero stood before the examiner in the arena. He didn't really know what to say, so Elman simply announced the start of the test. For some reason, she seemed curious about something on the boy's clothes. But that was just an excuse to make him bend down so she could attack him without him noticing. And so, while our hero fell due to her strategy, she got excited. And when he turned to look, an explosion occurred. A warrior in turn screamed that the examiner should fight fairly, but the genie confirmed that an adventurer must always be alert. So, she asked for the next person to step forward. Unexpectedly for her, our hero was perfectly fine after her attack. Because of this, Elman became curious to know how he survived since she didn't see anything. However, even our hero couldn't explain how he got out of that predicament and that he didn't see anything. So, he asked her if the girl was sure she attacked correctly. But what the genie understood was that Lewis was so arrogant that he judged her attacks as if they were nothing. Unable to bear this neglect any longer, she declares that this time she will do her best. Then Violet panics and Atrox becomes more agitated, requiring her to be restrained, so she won't interfere. Thus, the fairy finishes her movement and asks if the boy now sees the difference between them. But our hero remains completely oblivious and doesn't understand what difference she means. Elman asks how our hero managed to dodge the attacks without batting an eye since they were targeting vital area. In the end, the reason the examiner's attacks didn't succeed was surprisingly simple. Elman is a ninja who fights by targeting blood vessels, but the hero is made entirely of bone. Therefore, her attack, targeting pressure points, is ineffective against someone who doesn't have any. In the eyes of the fairy who doesn't know this fact, Louis seemed like an opponent beyond her level. In fact, he seemed like a terrifying monster she couldn't even dream of defeating. That's why, after she fell to her knees, the examiner's resolve returned, because facing something like this, she couldn't leave without neutralizing the threat. Both Atrox and Violet immediately sense the girl's killing intent and scream at the hero to be careful. In an instant, a huge cloud of smoke appears due to the pressure of the attack. This pressure is so strong that it knocks down the other participants as if they were in a hurricane. It seems her eyes have been consumed by power, and fortunately, the hero's companions stop her. Anyway, the Demon Queen comments that the fairy seems to be acting strangely. And indeed, after being overcome by a feeling of rage, she suddenly returns to her normal state without understanding what's happening to her. After Louis' exam, the examiner was replaced, and the other participants continued their tests. As a result, Louis managed to pass in last place, but of course, the two girls congratulate the hero, so he says it's nothing special. Anyway, Louis says he'll get a quest from there, so he leaves the two alone while he goes to get it. Thus, Violet enjoys the moment, but only until someone calls her name, saying it's a pleasure to meet her. Suddenly, the Guild Master of Paradise named Felton appears, who is one of the four greats of the Empire, and based on the girl's performance, he decides to invite her to his guild. But at that moment, another person appears saying it seems he's a little late. This is Solid, the Guild Master of Solidus, which is also one of the four greats of the Empire. Like his colleague, he wants to invite Violet to his group. Obviously, the two begin arguing to determine who arrived first. The fact that a beginner adventurer is receiving offers from two major guilds like these angers some of the other candidates. Anyway, even the subordinates start brawling, so the leaders ask which one Violet prefers. But to respond, all the girl asks is whether either of them knows how to restore a body to its natural state, specifically, the body of someone who is neither alive nor dead. In this case, the two begin thinking, but they admit they haven't heard of such a thing before. Therefore, Violet decides to reject the adventurer's offers. If this request can't be fulfilled, the girl says it simply makes sense to follow the person she chose to serve. Meanwhile, our hero shouts, announcing he's received a new quest. So while the conversation atmosphere breaks a little, Violet quickly says goodbye to them and runs happily with Atrox toward our hero. In the end, the two adventurers think the request was just a clever way to reject the offer. But still, they remain curious to know who this man is who holds greater value than them. For her part, Volker thinks the man must possess power greater than brute force, because they witnessed it themselves. This girl is a guild leader, and with Mystic, they form the last two missing from the four greats. Felton in turn thinks this kind of power won't appear again, but since they can't be sure, they think that Louis might have somehow returned to life. In the goblin dungeon of the area, several goblins appear frightened because the one standing before them is our hero. However, what scares them more isn't him, but the monsters walking beside him. At this moment, a goblin stronger than the others appears and asks the rest to retreat. Very annoyed that his subordinates can't handle 3 intruders, the Goblin King asks who the hero is to invade their territory. But the moment he pays closer attention, it seems the two recognize each other. When our hero first awakened as a skeleton, this was one of the goblins he faced. Therefore, our hero begins trembling, making Violet worried. Then, thinking this is cowardly behavior, V mocks him and asks if the skeleton remembers the old days. But, before he finishes speaking, he receives a powerful blow to his face with a wooden club. It's so strong that it not only breaks the weapon, but sends the king flying through the air, unable to believe what's happening. In the end, instead of being afraid like last time, Louis confirms he's grateful to be able to meet this scoundrel again. The goblins watch what's happening before them, not believing it. Meanwhile, Atrox seems excited and Violet extremely focused. That's because V, who was supposed to be the strongest among the goblins, is being beaten one-sidedly. And even as he begs Louis to stop, the hero continues without any mercy, just as they did to him. After some time, venting all the suffering he endured in the past, the king falls to the ground completely defeated. So, V wonders in his mind if this damn skeleton is the same one he knew, because for some reason, he seems completely different from before. V struggles to get up and asks if our hero isn't afraid of him. In his opinion, fear should be deeply carved into Louis's memory. But the answer V receives is a piece of wood thrown at his head. To complete the scene, the hero says there's no reason to fear a small insect like him. To explain better, Louis tells the goblin to look behind him. There are two people, thousands of times more terrifying than V, so there's absolutely no reason to be afraid. Moreover, Louis mentions he's no longer the same skeleton that V used to beat. In this case, the king screams, saying Louis is too arrogant just because he has support. However, the two girls he's talking about react with terrifying expressions, and this makes V realize that despite his anger, he needs to restrain himself to stay alive. Thus, V waves very affectionately and admits his defeat with a smile. But our hero interrupts this strange declaration from the monster and picks up a club again, saying he won't let the goblin go just because he's trying to act nice. So he warns him, it's not over yet, and tells the beast to get ready. He also clarifies that if he tries to escape, his bones will be broken. Later, the team raises their toasts with good drinks. The two girls praise the hero's good work. Louis in turn commented that if they wanted anything else, they could ask comfortably. So Violet asked the hero if he was sure, and he answered, yes. To clarify, Violet said she was talking about the goblin who was left alive and might want revenge. Should they go finish him off completely? Thinking about something like that made the hero think seriously about it. And since this goblin had hurt the hero before, they returned the next day to finish him off. The goblin begged with all his might to stay alive, saying he would become the hero's loyal dog. Thus, Louis analyzed how much the goblin wanted to live and got a little lost in thought. Since he had already gotten his revenge, our hero said it was fine because he had also gotten his reward. And when he asked Violet for her opinion on the matter, she agreed proudly. Later, at dinner time, Atrox stabs a piece of meat with a fork and tries to offer it to the hero's mouth. But before she does, Violet snatches the piece of food, considering the demon's behavior rude, because from her point of view, doing anything that might disturb the hero is very bad. Atrox gets angry and says Violet makes doing anything difficult. The girl grips her fork more tightly. With Violet continuing to annoy her, the queen asks if she wants to die. In response, Violet grabs a knife and says she'll only say this once to Atrox, to sit down and not do anything that bothers Louis. Since he knows them well, Louis really gets annoyed by their fighting. Violet quickly returns to her normal state and offers him a drink, and Atrox does the same thing. This leads to the two competing again for Louis's favor. Violet screams at Atrox to stop, but the demon responds in kind. Thus, inevitably, the two girls start fighting while Louis drinks at the table. From another table, a man asks his companion if he should go stop the commotion, but the companion says it's normal for drunks to fight. Besides, from the sound, the bald man can tell they're fighting over a man. Violet is pure with a beautiful smile and Aatrox seems very cute too, seeing that they're fighting over this man who drinks alone without a care. The only conclusion the bald man can draw is that this is the confidence of someone who has everything. However, the guild master of Lonely Sky named Musal is slightly annoyed. After a while, still in the tavern, most of the food plates were already empty. Our hero, who had enjoyed himself greatly, thinks he should order another drink since what they had was finished. But at this moment, the Lone Sky Guild men see an opportunity to talk to Louis and tell him to leave. However, being under the influence of alcohol, the boy asks what they mean by nothing. Clearly, the adventurers interpreted this sentence as if the hero was insulting them and considering them worthless. So, one of the followers breaks a bottle on Louis's head. For some reason, Louis thinks the man is talking about the leader's baldness. This is why Louis falls to the ground, feeling some pain in his head. But he also smiles, saying the men seem better than he expected. After the blow, the hero gets up a little and asks if the ugly bald man in front of him doesn't know how to properly take care of children. Both the word ugly and the word bald cause huge shock to the followers. That was a sensitive topic for Musul since their era was an era of hair loss. And so, after the insult became intentional, the bald man orders his followers to beat Louis to death. However, all the hero does is laugh at the situation. Then he asks, "Do you think you can do that?" And he's still laughing. Asks if the two girls heard what the men just said. But when he realizes, he's surprised because unfortunately for him, they were almost asleep from drinking. So, with no one to defend him, the followers did exactly what they said they would do. The next morning, Violet and Aatrox, who had somehow managed to get to their room, began to wake up, their heads still spinning. Given that, the hero asks if they had already woken up. Then Aatrox asks what happened earlier and the boy explains that he brought them back when they dozed off. Both apologize for causing trouble and the hero says it's alright. But when he removes his head cover to invite them to eat, his face is covered with bruises to the girls' surprise. Obviously, the two girls panic, wanting to know what happened to the hero. Since it's very embarrassing to admit that the great Louis got beaten up in the tavern, he claims he simply tripped over something in the street. So, he also changes the subject, asking them to shower so they can eat. But Violet is sure this isn't just an injury from falling. At that moment, Aatrox releases an energy burst, returning to her original form. She thinks Louis is hiding the truth, trying not to reveal who hurt him. However, even in this terrible situation, she remembers that at some point, an order was given to expel the hero. For the demon, it becomes clear that the culprits are yesterday's men, and obviously, she went out to get revenge for everything they did to her beloved. Violet in turn remembers that she asked them not to do anything against the hero. Then Aatrox asks, how can the girl say that after seeing him in this state? Violet actually answers that she will also go with the demon, especially because anyone who hurts the hero deserves punishment, so they won't be able to do something like this for the rest of their lives. And this is certainly something the queen strongly agrees with. After a while, in the Lone Sky Guild's shelter located on a mountaintop, one of the men seems very bored given they have an extremely annoying prisoner. Anyway, the same man warns that they have visitors, so the boss asks them to come back later. However, since he knows Muscle, the follower tells him it was a beautiful girl, and because of that, they allowed the hero's partners to enter. The leader in turn remembers that this is the girl who was with the weak man from the previous day. So, he asks how she found this place and praises the fact that she brought a beautiful friend with her. Anyway, Musul approaches with his knife, asking if they're here for revenge, if they're worried about the weakling. He suggests that men like them are much better than those types. In this case, Violet gently touches the adventurer's hand and asks if this is the hand that hit the hero. Then he answers somewhat confused, confirming it. And so, Violet understands and with just one movement sends the arm that did that flying through the air. It was such a fast movement that the bald man didn't understand for a moment, and only starts feeling pain after falling to the ground, making the followers panic. Violet explains that if the man tried to pick the flower, she would have punished the hand, and if he tried to step on it, she would have punished the foot. So, with a terrifying expression, she asks how the adventurer intends to damage her flower. Musul trembles with fear, calling his followers to attack Violet, and although they're also afraid, they attack, hoping they can do something. Meanwhile, the hero stops in the dining hall to eat. Even now, he complains about the pain, not understanding why they hit his face when he asked them not to do it. Anyway, at that moment, Aatrox enters the place, announcing she's back. The hero asks her where she went. Then the girl answers that she brought something that can bring money, asking this thing to greet the hero. Louis in turn asks who this fat uncle is. The man gets angry and shouts, asking if the boy knows who he is. However, because of this shout, Aatrox gets angrier and says that if he doesn't want to die, he better speak respectfully to Louis, which the man understands. Anyway, the hero asks the two to come eat. and if the fat man is also hungry, Louis invites him too. Of course, the man refuses because he was called that, but his stomach growls and inevitably he decides to put his pride aside. And so, the four begin eating in a very friendly atmosphere. However, at a certain moment, the man wonders what's happening there. Those who kidnapped him weren't weak, so dealing with them without injuries was unbelievable. Moreover, the two girls didn't seem like the type to follow someone given their completely different personalities. But regardless of that, somehow, they were now sitting at the table like good girls. Controlling them, with money and power must be impossible. So, taking this fact into account, the man thinks there must be only one option. To the hero's surprise, the man bows on the table and introduces himself as Dialogue. The man explains he was lord of Rebel Village until recently. He also mentions there's no possibility of anything under that robe, other than incredible beauty, so he asks how he knew that. Dialogue clarifies that attention to detail is what made him a lord, and he had already expected he was right. Believing he's talking to Louis, the man says he admires him and tells him he has a daughter with beauty enough to attract a line of suitors. For this, Dialogue asks if Louis is thinking of marrying her, but the real surprise is that Louis immediately agrees, leaving Violet and Atrox in shock. Before anything else, Dialogue warns there's a condition for allowing the marriage, explaining that marrying a princess isn't that simple. But hearing this, the hero says he no longer wants to marry. Naturally, the man panics and asks why. His daughter is incredibly beautiful. The hero replies that he's too busy to discuss conditions and knows every daughter is beautiful in her father's eyes. Dialogue couldn't believe he's refusing to marry his daughter just because he's busy. So, he decided to use a more direct approach and asked the hero if he was looking for something. This made the hero wonder how the man knew that. The lord replies that he must always be observant. Anyway, Dialogue admits he doesn't know what the boy is looking for, but he guarantees he'll help him. However, since the lord doesn't even know what the hero wants, it would be difficult. But if the hero is just looking for something he lost, Dialogue thinks this is a waste of time. For this reason, he simply asks the boy to save Rebelin Village for him, and if he does that, he'll get a great treasure. After a while, in a mountainous area, a cart passes, driven by a man with his horse. Inside, the four who were eating together can be seen. First, Dialogue asked about Atrox's cute appearance since the goal is to save the village. But if the man was too excited, the queen suggests he attack her to see what she's capable of. Violet changed the subject saying she'll accept the hero's decision, but she wonders how Dialogue will help them, explaining that if he's lying, he'll be in big trouble, making him tremble a little, even as a lord. Dialogue starts explaining about the treasure and asks the girl to put the knife aside. The man explains that to help find the treasure, there was a map, and that his ancestors, who were tired of war, dreamed of a peaceful life. And so, through this same map, they discovered Rebelin Village during an expedition. It was a place that wouldn't flood even in case of flooding. With good sunlight and wind, they achieved great abundance through farming. For a long time, the village was surrounded by rocks, so it was easy to prepare for enemy attacks. This was until this peaceful village started being threatened by that man. Naturally, the protagonist asks who this person is, and Dialogue explains that he's someone who sees human lives as insects. But fortunately, the man can take the protagonist because he thought marrying his daughter to him would protect the village. But at that moment, the two girls threaten him where it becomes clear that Dialogue was trying to manipulate Louis, saying he had no choice while being attacked. The lord shouts that the village is his most precious place. Precious enough to make him marry his daughter to a man he just met. So, after hearing his sincerity, the protagonist asks the lord not to worry, because as long as he can find what he needs, he'll do everything he can. So don't break your promise. And so, after more time traveling, the group arrives at Ripple Village. As soon as they arrive, the first thing they do is get something to eat, since it's so delicious. They all agreed to have more. So, they continue walking as if they're on vacation. The lord, who was left behind after getting tired of chasing them, feels somewhat disappointed that they're acting so carelessly, but he decides to go with the flow and relax a little too. While walking, someone comments on a commotion about the princess. Akali, a merchant, mentions that the festival was held with the purpose of marrying off the princess. So, the first man comments that the village's future looks bright, but the truth was that the princess's standards were so high that no one could reach them. Many men confessed their love to her, but they were all rejected because of their appearance. Anyway, the current prince is tall and handsome, so both hope things will go well. In this case, the protagonist hopes the princess doesn't have the same face as her father, but Delic assures him that he was handsome too when he was young. Suddenly, their conversation is interrupted by someone bumping into two other people. Continuing to run, he soon bumps into the town lord as well, causing them both to fall to the ground. Faced with this situation, the protagonist offers to help the man get up, which he accepts. As for the other man, he violently refuses help from his subordinates. This is the prince of the kingdom of Omniscient named Sebon. The reason he's acting this way is that he was rejected and rumors had already spread among the citizens. Sebo, who always heard praise for his beauty, was described as ugly. To vent his anger, he grabbed Dilok by the neck, wondering why he bumped into him. Fortunately, the protagonist appears to defend the Lord. Since the prince was the one who bumped into them first, he asks him to apologize, calling him an ugly bastard. Because an unknown person put his hands on the prince, the subordinates drew their weapons. But this time, the girls from the protagonist's group were alert, and with their meat skewers, they subdued the guards. Sebo had never been called ugly twice in one day before. So, feeling insulted and with unusual anger, he grabbed his weapon to eliminate Lewis. But at that moment, someone threw a shoe that immediately hit the man's face, making him fall to the ground unconscious as his subordinates rushed to him. After a short while, someone breaks the silence, commenting that they were annoyed by the rejection and came out to see how Sebo was doing. But Princess Ripple, named Cecily, didn't expect that Prince Omniscient was intimidating her father. The fact that the princess refers to her father reveals to everyone, to their surprise, that the Lord had returned. Then, Sebo feels confused, wondering if he's really his future father-in-law. But right when he says that, the princess gets angry because even though he was rejected, the young man grabbed Dilok by the collar and threatened to kill him. Of course, Sebo tries to explain, saying it was a misunderstanding and that he didn't know he was her father. But in response to that, the girl asks him if his father, who's still in the kingdom, would believe that. Anyway, for the prince's image, she says she'll keep this secret, but only if Sebo immediately returns to the kingdom he came from. After a while, in Ripple Castle, the princess screams asking what happened to her father, especially because even though it doesn't look like it, he lost so much weight that she almost didn't recognize him. Knowing Dilok, the girl becomes very emotional. The Lord in turn says he can't give all the details, but the girl understands that he has his reasons. By the way, Dilok says he has someone he'd like to introduce to Cecily. This person's name is Louis, someone even the Lord admits is handsome and who was about to be the man she would marry not long ago. Logically, the girl asks what her father is talking about, but since the protagonist already refused, he asks her not to worry. Sissy in turn gets angry, so Dilok asks her not to take it personally. While the girls from Louis' group boil with anger, Sissy thinks about why her father suggested marriage because she knows his preferences. So, she wonders if the protagonist might be her dream man. Changing the subject, her father asks Louis if he regrets not getting married now that he's met the princess. The protagonist thinks for some time, causing great anticipation, but he soon answers that he didn't like her much because she looks too much like the Lord, which made the others happy. Perhaps for the first time, Cecily feels what it means to be rejected directly. She says the protagonist is smart and thinks he refused strategically at first. She asks Louis to take off his cloak. After all, if he's really handsome, the two can get married. Louis doesn't like being pressured and confirms again that he doesn't care about her, so he asks not to be bothered. Describing her father as ugly and speaking informally with the princess is enough to provoke her. So, the girl orders her subordinates to take down this man. But all this was still part of her strategy to make the protagonist take off his cloak, which unfortunately didn't work for her. Because in a moment, the two guards she sent were shocked into the wall. Beside them, Violet states that the princess won't be able to touch Louis and the protagonist agrees. Since the two guards she sent were the best in the village, Cecily feels somewhat intimidated, wondering who these people are. To make matters worse, the girl's father shouts, wondering what she thinks she's doing. Dilok feels very disappointed that his daughter treated the guest he brought in such a bad way. To clear things up, he immediately apologizes to the protagonist, who accepts his apology without any problem. When the guest seems surprised, the Lord announces that they'll stop here for the day. With all the humiliation, the princess leaves with her guards. But before she crosses the door, the girl at least congratulates her father on returning home safely. Then she goes away and Dilok quickly puts his hands on his face, making Louis ask him what's wrong. Contrary to how he looks, the man quickly stands up saying he's perfectly fine. In the end, before the protagonist leaves, there's a place he must visit. Since he has to do this, he suggests the boy take a look at the village, and since he has nothing else to do, the protagonist naturally accepts. The next day, everyone notices the weather is great. Besides that, our protagonist, Louis, is in a very good mood because the skewers are delicious. That's why he asks why the princess is following him like a fly in soup. Since she's a princess, Louis really wants to know if she doesn't have something better to do. After thinking for a moment, the girl remembers that the protagonist might be her dream man. That's why she backs down a little, saying she's doing it because he might be a dangerous person. In this case, the protagonist tells her to take her freedom as long as she keeps her distance. So, the girl gets angry and asks if the boy really sees her as a fly chasing soup. But her foot hits a rock on the ground, and she loses her balance, and naturally starts to fall. Lucky for her, Cecily falls toward the protagonist like in a romantic movie. But instead of catching her, what our protagonist does is step aside, leaving her to fall to the ground. Instead of asking if she's okay, Louis reminds her of what he said about keeping distance between them and that she almost hurt him. Being very annoyed by everything, Sissy asks if this is what you say to someone who just fell. Then the protagonist puts a cloth on the girl's bleeding nose and explains that this is why he told her not to follow him. For the protagonist, the girl is too clumsy for an adult woman, so he leaves the handkerchief with her and asks her once again to stop chasing him because it's already become annoying. At the end of that conversation, the guards ask if the princess is okay. But all she was thinking about was how every man she'd met so far was fake and full of pretense, only showing their polished side. On the other hand, despite the protagonist's rude manner, his frank behavior was certainly something that made Sissy more and more curious. That's why she didn't listen to the boy's advice and decided to continue following the group shortly after. Looking at the entire scene in the city center, the citizens became angry and wanted to know the identity of the cloaked man who spoke casually with the princess. Suddenly, one of them thought of a good reason for Sissy's pursuit of him. He quickly decided to share his conclusion with the others. The princess had always been obsessed with handsome men to a ridiculous degree. The villagers concluded that her following someone like this could only mean that the man under the cloak was incredibly handsome. Naturally, as time passed and night fell, the princess returned to her room in the castle, complaining greatly about not being able to see Louis under the cloak, even after following him all day, especially since she was still curious to know if the boy was truly handsome. To satisfy her curiosity, Sissy asked her maid about the rumors regarding the hero. But what the maid told her was that according to the rumors, for her pride's sake, Sissy interrupted her saying he was an ugly person. But her maid continued that Louis was actually an incredibly handsome man. After hearing this, the princess remembered that wherever she went, people followed her. But at a certain moment, even the citizens began to recognize the hero, for the rumors to be strong enough to reach the princess's ears. Her heart beat faster than ever, because, for the first time, Sissy thought she would meet someone truly handsome. Meanwhile, somewhere, our hero felt an itch in his ear and concluded that someone must be talking about him. The next morning, everyone was worried because there was only one skewer left. So the stall vendor had to apologize to his customers. Louis asked in turn if someone had bought before them because the first thing they did upon waking was come here directly. With some hesitation, the vendor decided to explain. It was a fact that despite everything, the group had already eaten many skewers, but for some reason, lately, cockatrice monsters hadn't been appearing around the village as they usually do. In this case, the hero suggested hunting some for the vendor, but he strongly refused, wondering if Louis was trying to die. It's said that these monsters are usually hunted using traps and that a live one is dangerous because it can release poisonous gas on others. So, while offering the last skewer, the vendor asked the boy to wait a little because he guaranteed that if they were lucky, they would be able to catch one early the next day. Louis seemed very thoughtful about everything said, and to the vendor's amazement, Louis declared that hearing this made him more excited to catch the monster. After all, if the stored skewers were of this quality, Louis was excited to try a freshly grilled one. Despite the vendor's warnings, the group set off on another dangerous adventure, forcing the princess, who was watching everything from afar with a soldier, to practically follow them. After some time passed and evening came, the hero's group walked through a rocky field while Sissy followed them. The princess's guards wanted to know exactly where the cockatrices were because they really believed there weren't any there. On the other hand, the hero couldn't see anything either, but Violet said they were in the right place. Suddenly, a knight's voice was heard suggesting that everyone should return to the village now because it was getting late. This was the knight commander of Rebel, Ning Harbing. Since the princess was also participating in this expedition, the commander commented that it would become dangerous with nightfall. But despite Harbing's advice, the hero declared he wouldn't return. Furthermore, he wondered why they were being tracked in the first place, saying that if they were just going to bother them, they should leave. The princess in turn told Harbing that it was fine. However, the knight didn't want to tolerate such disrespect, and therefore drew his sword to finish the hero with an attack. At least that's what he would have done theoretically, but at the last second, Harbing stopped. Since the boy hadn't moved even a single millimeter, the knight asked if Louis had noticed that he hadn't actually intended to strike him. Just the wind from Harbing's movement caused the trees around them to be cut. However, the truth was that Louis hadn't noticed anything and was actually terrified. Anyway, Harbing commented that he had heard about the hero defeating some of his men during his absence. He then said he forgave Louis out of knightly mercy and advised him to act respectfully toward the princess from now on. He also clarified that the next time he was disrespectful, he would die. But before Harbing even noticed, suddenly, the two girls from the hero's group subdued him. He was amazed by their speed. Violet said she had restrained herself a lot until now and asked if the knight was testing her limits. It all started with a marriage proposal for Lord Louis from Delic. But when the boy was introduced to Sissy, that princess herself tried to kill him. And now even Harbing, who was the knight commander, dared to point his sword toward Louis. For this reason, although Violet really wanted to cut them all up, the knight's punishment was a perfect kick from Atrox to his face, done out of flower mercy. As for the rest, Violet grabbed her sword and split the ground, creating a terrifying windstorm. Thus, Violet warned the princess that no one had the right to treat the hero disrespectfully and that flowers should be admired with the eyes only, clarifying that this was a kind of threat rather than a simple request, which scared Sissy greatly. After saying that, the two girls returned to check on the hero, leaving the princess alone. Quickly, Harbing planted his sword in the ground with conviction and requested orders from Her Majesty. At first, the princess didn't understand what it was about. Then, Harbing explained that insulting her meant insulting the entire kingdom of Rebel. So all Harbing requested was an order from his superior. An order so they could fight for her honor to the death. Suddenly, a slap echoed throughout the forest. Harbing didn't know why, but he had just been slapped by Her Majesty. With tears in her eyes, Sissy expressed her anger, saying that if the knight spoke of death again, she would do it with her own hands. The princess was trembling because she didn't want to do that. So, Harbing was able to understand the girl's feelings and apologized. Back to the hero's point of view, he said he was fine, but asked why Violet hadn't protected him from the beginning. Atrox commented in turn that she trusted Louis's abilities, leaving him puzzled. Although the hero seemed as weak as a useless skeleton, the girl reminded him that he had extraordinary regeneration powers. So logically, Louis got angry but did nothing because he knew he would lose. Anyway, the hero simply called the two to return to the search when the ground began to shake like in an earthquake. At a short distance, the guards shouted to prepare for battle, and Harbing took care of the princess. Knowing it was too late, Violet drew her weapon, and the group waited for the noise to reveal itself from the forest. First, small animals began to emerge, almost dragging the hero with them. One of the royal guards was confused by this, but his colleague shouted at him to stay alert, especially with a huge gorilla suddenly appearing, with the same desperation that the other animals had shown. When Louis was ready to flee, Atrox asked him to look closely. That gorilla, which seemed like the biggest threat, was crying from inside the forest. A huge tongue shot out, precise as a whip until it reached the beast, piercing it like a skewer. It wasn't clear that the group had found the delicious animal they were looking for, but no one there expected the cockatrice's appearance to be this terrifying. Although the monster itself was scary, something else caught the soldiers' attention. Besides the first beast, there were other equally terrifying monsters. Cockatrices had always been known as solitary monsters, so it didn't make sense for so many to be in the same place. With an almost instinctive action, Harbing shouted to protect the princess. Being the strongest guard, he faced the first monster on the front lines. The attack came quickly and the knight commander managed to defend, but with great effort. The princess asked Harbing if he was okay. Regardless of his condition, the knight confirmed he wouldn't let the monster take another step toward her. He adjusted his stance to perform his secret technique, his trump card. The moment the monster approached, the technique the knight called Beautiful Sword Strike appeared. The monster roared trying to scare its opponent, but the knight responded with a more determined shout. Thus, Harbing emerged victorious, managing to strike the monster first. As soon as the monster fell to the ground, all the soldiers rushed to take advantage of the opportunity. Then, the cockatrice saw his entire life pass before his eyes. Some time ago, this monster was born into a good cockatrice family. He quickly grew up and became a young adult, and like all young ones, he was full of vitality. At a certain moment in his life, luck smiled on him, blessing him with a good partner he loved more than anything in the world. Everything went well until a special day came when the monster decided to propose to his mate. But for some reason, the mutant chicken who had been his soulmate until now refused. The cockatrice collapsed to the ground crying, wanting to know why he was rejected. All that time, they had gone hunting together and even shared worms. But what his former beloved said that day was that her old lover hadn't been paying attention, because she had said over and over that she was allergic to worms and was exhausted. So let's end this. And she left him crying on the seashore. All these memories returned as the soldiers' swords approached. The monster began suffering an existential crisis as the guards attacked him mercilessly, making them very excited that they could defeat a cockatrice. With all enthusiasm, they shouted that the princess could now rest, making Harbing so proud that he caught Louis's attention to show how strong rebels knights were. However, on the hero's side, all the other monsters in the pack had already been defeated. Harbing had to admit that Louis's group consisted of real monsters. Now, the next stop would be the village. but the defeated monster suddenly reappeared and from behind the princess released a thick cloud of poison. The gas made it impossible for the Knight Commander to see in front of him, and if it was difficult for someone well-trained like him, it was worse for Sissy, who accidentally inhaled some of it. However, while she was about to faint, skeletal feet crossed the fog, and Louis's hands covered Sissy's mouth and nose, while he gently asked about her condition. Heading straight toward the beast in front of him, the hero called out to the monster. He wondered why it attacked the princess from behind like a coward. The princess who is useless, weak, and brings nothing but trouble. Louis says they call her a princess, but all she does is waste food, which made Sissy increasingly uncomfortable. However, the hero stated that even beasts should have common sense, and wondered who allowed it to act so irresponsibly and whether the beast thought the world revolved around it. This was a sensitive point because it was exactly what his ex-girlfriend had said when she left him. That cockatrice's stress level went beyond all limits and it rushed forward crying, saying that humans could never understand it. As it ran, all the beast was thinking about was that no one could understand its love. But once its energy was completely drained, it finally collapsed, defeated. The guards quickly checked and confirmed that the beast had stopped breathing. Assuming this was his personal failure, the knight couldn't understand how Louis knew the beast was on its last breath. Furthermore, to control such power, he thinks this level of composure might be natural for someone like him. But now, Harbing has also become curious to know what kind of power someone like Louis possesses. While the hero was splashing some water on his face, Cecily appeared asking what he wanted. For some reason, the princess didn't understand that Louis had thrown himself into the poisonous gas to save her. And now, thinking about it, the hero himself doesn't know why he wasn't affected. Maybe because he's a skeleton. Anyway, Cecily continues and says that because of Louis's actions, she'll grant him one wish. But the hero only replies by calling her rude. After all, when someone saves your life, you should say thank you, not ask what they want. So Louis asks the rude princess to listen carefully. From now on, to her surprise, he asks her to stay out of his business. And so, the group leaves, taking the monsters with them while Louis says that's all he wants. After a few seconds, Sissy shouts, claiming she never said she was interested in him. Extremely angry at all that confidence, she asks Harbing if she looks like someone interested in that madman. She complains that she's the most beautiful woman in the world and isn't interested in anyone, while the knight enjoys the scene. Back in the village, due to the hero's massive hunt, dinner was served abundantly. Dialuk was one of those who took the opportunity to eat a lot, but the girls in the hero's group asked him to stop making weird noises because it was ruining their appetite. Given that, Cecily's father wondered about the hero who was eating more desperately. But obviously, for these women in love, any mistake Louis makes is actually a success. Getting back to important matters, the hero asked where Diluc had been all this time since he said he would go out briefly. Then the former lord said he had been through hard times and after some struggle, thanked his hero, because thanks to him, the village became as happy as it is now. Moreover, Diluc thanked Louis for saving his daughter's life, who is the one he cares about most. Since he's grateful to this extent, the hero asked for the map, but Diluc said Louis would already have it when he leaves the village, which annoyed him a bit, thinking the old man wouldn't hand it over. To explain, the former lord tried to clarify what the map was, but the hero started talking to the girls about food. So, in the end, Diluc gave up trying to talk to the hero, thinking it was a waste of time. While the feast was being held inside the village, outside a man called his master, announcing that he had confirmed everything was prepared as requested. Thus, this master named Selim called his followers to head directly to Rebel Village, which he claims is rightfully his. In Rebel Castle, the hero and the two girls sat at a table while Diluc asked them, "Do you know that there are no animals or beasts appearing around the village and that the cockatrice monster never appeared near the village?" The hero confirmed he had heard that too, remembering what the merchant told him. Asked why he was asking. So Diluc remained silent for a moment, then said that animals have senses superior to humans and mentioned that before rain, for example, birds get closer to the ground and before earthquakes, you find frogs migrating in groups. Violet figured it out, and Diluc supported her, saying that means something dangerous is really happening in the village. He continued that while he was outside in the past few days, he tried to discover it himself, but couldn't solve the mystery. The hero was surprised hearing the word mystery. Then Diluc said they would arrive soon, so Louis asked him who he meant by they. While telling them, it was the person he mentioned to them before. Someone suddenly opened the door, revealing it was Selim, who headed toward Diluc saying, "I'm back, brother," then hugged him and told him he didn't know how much he missed him, and that he felt relieved to see him alive. Then the hero and the two girls asked what was happening and decided to applaud this emotional scene. In another scene, Selim stood outside the castle, welcoming the village residents who were happy in turn that Lord Selim had returned. Then Louis asked Diluc if this was the person threatening the village's peace. Diluc answered yes. Louis thought he would be scary since people say he treats humans like insects. Then one of the wizards approached Selim and cast some magic so Selim could speak to the people. Selim began his speech by thanking people for gathering today, and that thanks to their concern he was able to return to the village safely, and that he traveled to many cities and villages, but none of them was as happy as Rebelin. Because he wants to protect that happy village, he decided to take the opportunity to announce that he decided to give up his position as lord and return it to its former holder, his brother Diluc. During that, Diluc was shocked, then stepped toward Selim and asked him what kind of conspiracy he was plotting. Selim answered that he had no such intentions. He said he was only holding the position during his absence and that the lord position was never his. Then he bowed to Diluc, raising the crown, and said, "It was always your rightful position." All of the girls and Louis were watching and not understanding what was happening and decided to just applaud again. During that scene, people screamed that this was impossible, and one of the villagers said that because of your presence, Lord Selim, they were able to live a happy life. Another man shouted that Lord Selim gave his utmost and that life became better under his care, then begged him to reconsider and not say such things again. Then Selim shouted and asked them, "Do you really not know anything? The reason you're living a good life is because Diluc runs a strong institution." He said that, then started coughing blood from his mouth. One of the guards rushed to him, but Selim stopped him and said his body was in bad condition and he might die at any moment. He asked the villagers for one last request, which was to trust him. Then he asked them, "Will you stay with me here in Rebelin until the day I die?" They answered while shedding tears that of course they would. Then their shouts rose that they would stay by his side and never leave Rebelin. During that, Louis spotted a strange person wearing a coat who looked suspicious. Louis asked him, "What are you staring at, you bastard?" That man turned and left. Louis asked sarcastically, "Are you scared?" Then after a little while, Selim apologized to Louis and his group for that chaos, then said to Louis that he hadn't seen him before, "So, can I ask what your relationship is with my brother?" While Louis was answering that he and the old man, Diluc rushed to him and interrupted, saying they were his personal guards. Selim said he heard Louis calling him the old man. Diluc told him that he was the one who asked him to call him that. During that, the mysterious robed man was watching from afar. The two girls got angry at Diluc because he said they were his personal guards, so he begged them to convince Selim of that only. Then Selim told Louis while shaking his hand to take care of his brother. Louis answered yes, but his manner didn't please the guards, who considered him rude, and asked him to show some respect or they would kill him. This made Atrox excited to start fighting. When they were about to fight, someone shouted at them to stop that. It was Sissy, and she asked them what all this chaos was about. Then she asked Violet why she was fighting again. She answered that they drew their swords in front of Louis. Night Harbing ordered them to lower their swords because they didn't realize the importance of those guests. They replied that they had no intention of killing them. Then suddenly, their swords shattered and Harbing said what really worried him was their lives. The guard was terrified by that and didn't know when it happened. Then Harbing thanked her and told him that the one he should thank was the princess because she was the one who saved their lives. Then Selim stepped forward to the princess and told her she was late. She replied that she wasn't planning to come. Then her features became serious and she asked him why he was causing chaos by taking a position that belongs to someone else. Silence prevailed for a while, then the princess left him. But he said he didn't think this would happen and offered for them to have food together. But she didn't answer him and went to Louis and asked him if he was hurt anywhere. He replied that he was fine. Then he asked the two girls to go have something to eat. The princess asked to join them. He told her he was the one who would pay. She asked him, "Why do you pay when we eat together? Why don't we share?" He told her she was going with him and she was a princess so she shouldn't pay anything. She was surprised by the response and thanked him. While they were moving, Louis asked the old man, "Should we show off and order something expensive to celebrate your return as lord?" After that, Selim watched them leave, then called one of his followers and asked him why the princess was following that man. He replied that he thought the princess liked him. He told him he was wrong and with angry features said that Sissy was worried about his health, and that's why she was getting close to that man to make sure he wouldn't hurt him. Then he asked his follower if his words were wrong. He answered while scared that he was completely right. Then he said there was no need for the princess to do that because he would focus on that man. During that, an insect was passing by his foot so he crushed it and with crazy features said he would eliminate him himself.